it's really just coming down to how it's affecting us. I mean, it is a reality in the current administration that our generation can't afford to buy a home. They can't afford to start a family. You can't even afford to attain the American dream. If Kamala Harris gets elected on Tuesday, we're in a position where we would be the generation serving on the front lines in a proxy war.
Campus seems to be where the most riots, where the most protests, where the most clashing of the minds are. And I think it all just stems of, I hate Trump.
A lot of people attack the orange men's personalities, but I gotta say, I love the guy's policies, and I would put his policies over his personality every single day.
Was there something that you just saw that infuriated you where you're like, yeah, I'm tired of sitting back. I'm tired of being that kid that you don't want to say anything? Like, was there a moment like that where you're like, yeah, I'm just going to start talking about these things? On a bit of a podcast interview run, huh?
Yes, we've done 8 so far. This is the 9th, and then there's 2 more. So while I'm in a studio, we're trying to get as much done as possible. So I'm glad we got to do this. This is fun.
I love that. I love that. So for those of you guys that clicked on this video, we have none other than Brilyn Hollyhand. It's the reason why I reached out to you is because I'm 19, so our age gap isn't too far off. And when I see somebody like yourself doing what you're doing, having a book that you've already published, you're a best-selling author, being a part of the RNC, like there's so many things that I'm like, wow, there's still faith in the younger generation. And, we're not totally indoctrinated. We're not totally screwed to the left, but, I appreciate you nonetheless for taking the time to do this interview.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This looks like such a fun program, and I'm just super excited to get to talk to somebody that does not have gray hair, because that's what I've been doing all day. So this is exciting.
For sure. We're gonna make it exciting. I actually had an event last week called the Fight for America with Laura Loomer, Alex Stein, and Ryan Forner. You're familiar with him.
Yeah.
And one of the attendees got up because when we were doing the open Q&A, one of the attendees stood up and said, "Oh, I have a question. I believe this was for Ryan," right? And she said, "I used to be a Democrat." She was 19. She was like, "I used to be a Democrat and I just hated Trump, and I never knew why. I just hated Trump. That was what I was supposed to do. That's what, if you like Trump, then you're weird, you're evil, you're racist, you're this, you're that." And she was like, "But thank God my eyes are open. I'm starting to see what the reality of it is, that the higher ups we're their target audience because they know we're the next generation. Because more than likely the boomers, the hires up, like they already have their mindset, but we're the people that they're targeting." And she was like, if it wasn't for people like yourself that were on the independent media and spreading, the news, saying the truth about what's happening, I would have never realized that I was wrong.
Wow.
Let me ask you, do you think the younger generation is waking up and saying, yeah, all this is a little fishy?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I just finished an 8-stop campus tour in 4 weeks, and we finished it last night. I was at Auburn last night, then UGA the night before. And both nights, which I thought was unique back to back, we had people stand up and say, "Listen, I'm a Democrat. Like my whole family's always voted Democrat. I voted for Joe Biden in 2020. I thought that Kamala Harris was going to make history and was going to be so cool, the first female vice president. That's why I supported her." These are both 2 females. And I just can't do that again. And I was like, I'm so happy. Like, I love that. Explain. And they were like, it's really just coming down to how it's affecting us. I mean, it is a reality in the current administration that our generation can't afford to buy a home, that our generation can't afford to fill up their gas tank. They can't afford to start a family. You can't even afford to attain the American dream. It's really sad. It's unfortunate. These things are directly affecting us. This isn't something like it's a make-believe land where the government is doing things that could potentially affect us 10 years down the road. Like, this is affecting us day to day. It's making it harder to breathe here in America, and we're wanting to change that.
What do you think are the things that will be affected, if either or wins? If Kamala wins, like what is it that's going to be directly affected specifically for us? Because obviously, like, I don't know about you, but I'm not planning to buy a home anytime soon. But obviously it is a near future goal. But what do you think are the specific concerns or the specific things that would directly be affected by, Kamala or Trump winning?
Yeah, I'll tell you a fun story. So a few weeks ago, I turned 18, got to register to vote. Came back home. It was like my first weekend home in close to a year. And we got to have a lot of fun celebrating. And I'm sitting there, we're at the lake, and I decided that I was going to register to vote. And so I'm pulling out the little, registration form online, and a friend of mine had just turned 18 as well. And he's like, I'm going to register too. Well, we get to the last page of the voter registration screen, and it says, oh, by the way, when you're 18 and you register, we're also registering you for the draft. So if there were to be a draft, you're now going to be a part of that as soon as you click this button. We both kind of look at each other like, okay, like that's kind of serious, but like you don't really have an
Yeah.
option. Like that's America. And it hit us that we are the generation that would be serving on the front lines. So if Kamala Harris gets elected on Tuesday, we're in a position where we would be the generation serving on the front lines in a proxy war. That should terrify every single person. I don't say it to be a fearmonger. I say it to be, to put out reality that's not something that you should overlook. It's something that we always say, oh, it's far off and it's distant. And it's something we learned about in history class, but we're inching closer and closer to war, not only in Ukraine, but in the Middle East. And that's something that's terrifying. Now, on the other hand, you could have a president come back into office who would not only bring down inflation, but bring up jobs for Gen Z. Somebody that would actually make it easier to survive in America, and somebody that would bring back the American dream. I think we all can get on board with that. And a lot of people attack the orange men's personalities, but I got to say, I love the guy's policies, and I would put his policies over his personality every single day.
And there was Tom Ellsworth from Value Team, and
Yeah.
he said it. He gave an example of, well, if you're running, you had a heart attack, you got a gunshot, whatever it was, right? And you're running to two doctors. You have two choices: one that has a 90 and one win rate. There's 90 people that he saved, and one person died, but that one person was like obese. Or you have but his personality, he's trash. He's an asshole, and nobody likes him. But then you have the other person, and he's new. He's never done anything, but he's likable. He's a great guy. Your family loves him. Who are you running to in that situation? And I personally said, I was like, I'm okay with the 91 person because I don't think it's a personality test. And
Yeah.
he was like, that's the same thing with the elections. It's not a personality test. And I think that's where the clash comes from the younger generation, at least from what I'm seeing on campus, because campus seems to be where the most riots, where the most protests, where the most clashing of the minds are. And I think it all just stems of, yeah, I hate Trump. Yeah, that's why I just hate Trump.
And they actually are voting for Kamala because they hate Trump, not because they love Kamala. It was the same thing with Biden in 2020. We're seeing a lot of that. To your first point about kind of this analogy here, I give a similar one on my campus tours where I say, listen, I'm not electing Donald Trump to be my preacher. I'm electing him to be my president. I don't have to love the guy's 70 something years of morals in every action of his life. My current church is going through a pastor search committee. I would never in a million years nominate Donald Trump to be the next pastor of my church, but I will be casting my vote for him on Tuesday. And I encourage every other Gen Z person watching this podcast to do that. It's that important of realizing what you're actually doing. If this isn't just a game, if this isn't just something that you can mess around with, that the decisions that you're making aren't just going to affect the future that we all grow up in, but also the future that we raise families in one day, because you have to think in the nearest distant future, that's going to be happening for our peers. And that's something we need to take very seriously. As the second point that you made about the campuses, we're seeing a lot of that. We saw back in the spring campuses be shut down from some of these protests, specifically Yale, Columbia, some of that stuff. To this day, we're still seeing some campus protests. What I want to point out to your audience is that is the loud minority. They call Republicans the silent majority. What we're seeing with the 5 to 10, maybe if they're lucky, 15 blue-haired liberals with the nose rings and bullhorns attempting to shut down a college campus, those are just the 15 people that are getting the media coverage because they're screaming and they're so loud. And the media is overlooking the thousands and thousands of college students that are going on with their normal days, going to classes, hanging out with friends, being a normal high school or college student. Those people are what's going to shock the media on Tuesday. When the youth vote numbers come out and they say, wow, why do these young people vote for Trump? I thought everybody on TikTok said they hated Trump. No, just the ones that have time to film TikToks hate Trump. Just the ones that have time to sit there and rant to their phone screen have time to hate Trump. The rest of the average Americans, the average college student, are going on with their normal lives. They don't have time to, just rage on TikTok about the election. And I think that that's one of the things that's made polling a little skewed.
I like that. The loud minority. I've
Yeah.
never heard. I sorry, I've never heard that before, and that's interesting because that you even taught me something right now because I always see it. I go to FIU, and FIU is a very liberal school, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. There's communist clubs. There's a bunch of different stuff going
Insane.
on campus, but you see all these things happening all the time, and the way that you just describe it, that it's a silent, no, it's a loud minority. That's interesting.
Yeah, I wrote a whole chapter in my book about it.
I like that. Let me ask you, speaking on that, right? I heard in an interview that you weren't like, people could assume, well, he probably just came from this family that was very political. They were, they're already rich. They just put him in the positions. When you actually shared that your brother, I believe, was a school teacher, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mom was a school teacher, dad was in construction, not a family that grew up in politics at all.
was there something that you just saw that infuriated you, where you're like, yeah, I'm tired of sitting back. I'm tired of being that kid that, I don't want to say anything. Like, was there a moment like that where you're like, yeah, I'm just going to start talking about these things?
Yeah, I interviewed a therapist when I wrote the first chapter of my book about kind of the issues with Gen Z. And one of the things they pointed out is that we're frustrated, rightfully so. There's a lot to be frustrated with. But instead of actually putting our frustration and venting that into effective change, we vent it into rage and anger. We riot, we loot, we burn, and we post on social media, and that does nothing. I did the opposite. I decided to actually do something with that frustration. It really boiled down to after the 2016 election. So happy that Donald Trump won. Didn't really know who the guy was. Didn't really know what a Republican was or even what politics in general was. But I liked what he said. I liked that he was the outsider, and I liked the ideas that he gave hope for America. That was my extent of knowledge at the time. But I started watching a little bit more and saw that our parents and grandparents' generation had raised this class of politics where they just screamed at each other. And that's unfortunate. Like, that's not the America that we need to be growing up in. We need to be talking to each other instead of screaming at each other. I decided I wanted to kind of push back against that narrative, kind of on both sides of the aisle. And that started my news service. That started having conversations. That started the podcast. That led to the newsletter. That led to traveling the country. That led to a speaking tour. That led to the book. That led to me being on the show today. Because all of this is part of this movement of leading Gen Z to start talking. Every night at the convention, we were with President Trump in Milwaukee, had a different thing. Make America safe again, make America strong again, make America powerful again. Wonderful stuff. What we need to do is be making America talk again. When we do that, Gen Z leads the charge to heal that divide, both sides of the aisle, and we can bring down the temperature in the room.
It's great. Do you have like all these responses just stored away in your brain, or is it all coming to you naturally?
Most of it's naturally. I haven't had any media training. My publicist tried to get me some a while ago, and I didn't have time for it. And I don't really prepare answers at all. It just kind of every interview is different. So you'll see.
I love it though. I think you definitely. I want to see what people say in the comments down below, but I definitely
Yeah,
think you
me
have a
too.
bright future in politics. I definitely see you being a,
Thank you.
a governor, running for president, something. I see it in you. I see it in you. But what do you advise for the people that are our age, right? And they say they're that silent majority that's saying,
Yeah.
I support Trump, but I don't want to speak out because if I speak out, I might lose job opportunities. Well, if I speak out, they might, the school might, say some things, my parents, I can't say all this. So what do you say to those people that are fearful of the repercussions of coming out about speaking of the truth?
Yeah, it's simple. We're all frustrated, and being silent has achieved nothing. Absolutely nothing. I understand why you're being silent. I understand why you're terrified of modern day cancel culture. I understand that even sharing a simple Instagram post to your story could get you canceled by your professors, canceled by your friends, canceled by your family, and make Thanksgiving dinner incredibly awkward. I understand all of that, but it's so important to speak out right now. Not to speak out when you're an adult, not to speak out when you think the time's appropriate, to speak out literally today, actually, kind of yesterday, because it's so important now in this time to be using your voice. I don't like the phrase silent majority because we don't need to be a silent majority because for too long we've been silent, and that's why we haven't won an election cycle since 2016. Yes, the silent majority has come into clutch in some races like 2016, but why be silent? Why shock the pollsters when the polls can just be a little bit more accurate ahead of time and save everybody from having to take their heart pills on election night? I really genuinely believe that people speaking out, as scary as it might be, will lead for that effective change so that there's not this pent up anger and frustration that leads to riots and looting and screaming and shutting down college campuses.
Was there any fear for you? Was there any like second guessing of, should I really go all in on this? Or
Yeah, so a story I tell on the campus tour, it's a funny one. So taking that first step into politics is difficult. Like you kind of have a little bit of an idea of how hard it might be, and then you do it, and you've got adrenaline, and you're like, yippity doo dah, that was a lot of fun, and you keep going. What I always tell people is the second step is the hardest. like taking that second step after your first interview, after your first tweet or whatever you're doing, after you get the hate, after the arrows are being slung at you, and you're like, yes, I'm going to commit and keep doing this. Because you have that choice there where you can be like, oh, let me cower and run away and never do this again. Or actually, I'm going to devote myself to saving something and something greater than yourself, America. It's difficult. I wake up to death threats every morning. My family has been, ridiculed. My friend group's been ridiculed, unfortunately. Calls to my school, unfortunate things like that. But it's
Wow.
part of it. And I think that having hard conversations, bringing down the temperature in the room, talking to each other instead of screaming at each other, prevents stuff like that from happening in the future. So, absolutely, would it be a lot easier to say, yeah, I'm going to give this up, had some fun, did a little tour. No, I'm going to go back to playing on the playground with my friends. Yeah, that would be easy, but then nothing would change and America would never be saved. And I think that it takes a lot more people than just me standing up and speaking out and being willing to put their neck out there and taking that second step, even if the arrows are being slung at them, by saying America is worth it.
Crazy responses. You're very mature for your age, and I
Thank you.
I really don't say it lightly, but I'm very rarely like ultra impressed where I'm like, damn, bro, this is great. Like it's like a hidden gem. Like I really do mean I think you have a
Well, thank
great
you.
future ahead of you. And I want to pin something that you just said, that the clashing between two people, because going back to the event that I had, Alex Stein was saying something where he was like, we all know people that are going to vote for Kamala, but the way of convincing them, the way of like showing them what's right isn't yelling at them and telling them you're an idiot. How are you going to vote for that? Like that's not the solution to it. How do you go about, especially now that you just finished your tour, you've been on college campuses, you've seen the
Yeah.
energy on college campuses from both sides. How do you go about having that conversation with somebody that doesn't share the same viewpoints with you, and you're trying like for them to like, understand where you're coming from? Because it's very hard sometimes.
Oh, it's difficult. It's terrifying. I always start with common ground. So when I have somebody, make a comment in the middle of a speech or come up afterwards, ridiculing a little bit, I want to start with something we agree on before we get to the hot topics. What I found with our generation is a lot of us agree on how bad the handling of COVID was. So we can start talking about, isn't it bad how, intense big government got on infringing upon us by shutting us out of schools. I was in middle school when COVID hit. A lot of the people I'm speaking to were in high school. Some of them even missed their graduation at this point in time. So I talk to them and I say, wasn't that unfortunate? Wasn't that horrible that they locked us into our homes? You start with something you can agree upon. When you start both agreeing upon taking down big government, then you can get into the smaller issues. Yeah, I really think that it starts with those conversations. It starts by having difficult conversations, whether those are in the classrooms, whether those are at the lunch table, whether those are with your own family or friend group. You need to have them because, again, talking to each other prevents that screaming, that prevents the rage, that prevents just this intensity when the temperature's gotten way too hot in America. I think everybody on both sides of the aisle can agree upon that. We don't want to get more divided. When I got into politics, I told you it was a 2016 cycle. I was 11 in the fourth grade, and I thought it was way too divisive then. And here we are 8 years later, and it's somehow gotten even more divisive, literally by the day. We got to move away from this.
And I don't think that is a good thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I know you're a Christian, and there's something that always stands out to me that Christ said that he didn't come to be, he came to be a sword. I believe it was something
Yep.
along those lines. You quote me if I'm
Yep.
wrong, but he came to be a sword. And I say that because I also don't think division is the answer for what's happening. Like that's very wise what you said, saying, okay, you agree that you want the best for America. You agree you don't like paying the highest price on gas. You agree you don't like millions of people coming into our borders that are rapists, that are killers. You agree on that, right? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some policies, some concerns that our generation should be concerned with? Because, and I asked you this, you know, I think there's a disconnect sometimes when politicians and stuff for the younger generation say stuff about taxes and like, that stuff may seem a little bit too, that doesn't really matter to me. So what are some policies that should concern us?
Yeah, I think there was a really unfortunate moment in this election cycle that shifted a lot of Gen Z's perspectives, and it was Lincoln Riley's brutal murder in Georgia. A college student, a member of a sorority, being raped and murdered on a college campus that she thought was safe, just out on a nightly walk, really struck the heart of a lot of Gen Z Americans, regardless of what side of the aisle they sit on.
Yeah.
Looking at that, a non-border state, this is in Georgia, on a college campus, a place that everyone feels safe on, that you pay money to go to, and saying
Mhm.
that happened to her. Like if that happens to her, it could happen to all of us. That woke a lot of people up, that us saying that we need a border wall isn't racist, it's for security. Us saying that we need border security isn't to pull funding from another group, it's to protect everyday Americans. We've warned about what could happen. We've warned about the realities of that. But I think that story specifically woke a lot of people up. So since then, being on campuses the past 4 weeks, I've seen people say, oh, like, I would love it if Kamala was a little bit more intense on her border security policies. Like, I'm voting for her, but I would love to see some of that. And I was like, well, she has been the first to say that a border wall is racist. She's been the first, she stopped the construction of the border wall on their first day in office with Joe Biden. Maybe vote for the guy that started the building of the border wall. Maybe vote for the guy that wants to put more border agents. Like, oh, it's not that serious of an issue for me. I care more about rights and I care more about freedom. So I said, no, 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 no. If you get murdered, you don't have the rights regardless. So maybe vote for the guy that's going to prevent you from being murdered on your college campus. Like, oh, well, I think about it. It's stuff like that it doesn't go over the heads of people anymore. Like they're realizing it of how serious this is. And it's unfortunate that it required that to happen, but it started a conversation that's so necessary.
I love that. I heard on an interview, I forgot the interview name. It was recent. It was like 2 months ago. But you were talking about your faith in Christ.
Yeah.
And the interviewer asked you, he was like, well, how do you balance, how do you do either or of spreading the gospel and or talking about politics? And you said, well, it's not or, it's together, it's collective. Like
Exactly
same
right.
thing that you just said in the beginning. It's not that you're choosing Trump to be a preacher, you're choosing him to be a president. So you don't have to agree with everything as far as morality and different stuff like that. But you shouldn't say, well, I'm not going to vote for that guy because I'm a Christian and he's done this in his life. He was with a porn star. Like, no. How do you, as a Christian, deal with that objection that people give you? Well, he's a bad person. He did this with the porn star. He messed people over when he was making money. Like, how do you deal with that?
So all throughout my life, I always put my faith first and my politics second, and politics and everything else follows that faith. So if Donald Trump comes out tomorrow and supports something that goes against every fiber of my being within my faith, I'm gonna, go against that policy of his. That doesn't happen. I don't think it's gonna happen. The day it does, I'll be the first one to say something. Um, I choose the people I support and the stances that I support based upon the Bible and my faith. When I wrote the book, every chapter starts with a verse. There's a whole chapter in the middle of the book about my faith and how my faith applies to certain situations in my life. And people are like, how did you get through that? And I'm like, well, let me tell you the story. Let me show you what actually happened behind the scenes in the green room and be praying for hours before this happened. And you just saw, the glitzy camera version of it. And you're like, oh my gosh, you pulled it off. Seeing stuff like that in the book, I thought was important. We got to a moment with one of the publishing teams that luckily I didn't sign with. And they told my agent that, oh, we love the book, love everything he's doing, we're going to buy it. But one thing, yeah, he's going to need to take all the Bible verses out. And I said, yeah, that's just not going to happen. And they were like, well, we're going to pay you this much. And I was like, still not going to happen. Well, we'll raise it to this much. Still not going to happen. So ended up signing with another publishing house. That's wonderful. That gave us less money instead of signing with a group that was going to pay us a lot more money because I wanted to stand firm on the belief of having the Bible verses in the book. Now, it's been rewarding because I've had people come up on college campuses saying, I didn't really understand some of the policy lingo in the chapter about, say, taxes or the chapter about indoctrination within schools. But when I read the verse, I realized that it's all connected, that the things that we're talking about today were relevant, in biblical times. And this was all predicted. And this is the reason that he was praying about this then and it's happening today. It was all a timeline, and putting the Bible verse in there was that important that it struck with everyday college students. That's why I kept him in there. That's why I fought for it, and I'll happily continue to.
I'm gonna order your book as soon as we get off the interview. I'm really inclined to read it. I don't know
Thank
if
you.
this was a verse that you put in there, but these three verses come to mind because I believe you are a man of faith that probably has read these verses, but definitely lives them out. One of them was Jeremiah 29:11. For I, the Lord, knows the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you. Seek first the kingdom of God, and then the rest will be added. And commit your
Absolutely.
plans unto the Lord, and they will succeed.
Yeah.
Now, you being 18, recently turning 18 as well, did you have any hesitation saying, man, but I'm giving up the parties, I'm giving up this, I'm doing this, I could be young, I could just be doing this. Like, do I have to be talking about this? Do I have to be writing a book? Do I have to be going to college campus? Was there any, friction?
Yeah, I mean, there's the temptation to want to stay here on the weekends and hang out with my friends and be a typical high school senior and go to class and just hang out with guys. Like that sounds fun. Being able to still go on dates on the weekends, like doing stuff like that sounds great. We'll do that after the election, hopefully a little bit more. But I've been gone so much that when I hear about it, yeah, sure, there's a temptation there. But the other aspect of it is I'm certainly not being forced to do any of this. I finished the original book tour, I guess it was end of September-ish, mid-September. And my team was like, okay, great. Like, go take a nap. Like we'd done a 3-month book tour and they're like, oh, that's it. We'll see you on election day. I was like, no, 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 no. Like we still have, 5 weeks, I think is what it was at the point until election day. Like, let's book more events. And they're like, no, like this is your time to be home and rest and, be a kid. And like, but it's not election day yet. Like there's still more people I can go talk to. So that's why we just booked the campus tour that I finished last night with Turning Point because I wanted to do more. So yes, I had the option to spend 5 weeks at home, hanging out on the lake, watching football games with my friends, going on the dates on the weekends, hanging out at the parties. But I decided to spend those 5 weeks actually making an effort to try to do something. Um, was it worth it? I absolutely think so.
I love that. And I hope that more individuals that are watching this that are in our generation understand that I truly believe that the sacrifice is worth it. I
Yeah.
believe the fulfillment and joy of the Lord that comes when you know you're doing his plan is so much more than the temporary party, the
Yeah.
drinking, the this, that, which I don't do and I don't think you do either. But it just, you
Definitely
know,
not.
it's I don't think it can compare, so I really hope that your testimony, what you just shared, can serve as light for somebody else, because Jesus calls us to be the light of the world, and I believe that's what you are doing. I know your time is tight. I would definitely another day love to do this, hopefully in person. We both excel in our careers. We come back and say, hey, remember that interview we did 2 years ago, a year
Yes.
ago, whatever. Come back together. But seriously, I appreciate you for taking the time.
Thank
Any
you.
last remarks? This will come out maybe Monday, so a day before elections.
Mm, there you
Yeah,
go.
it's gonna be tight, but definitely everybody's already voted by this time. Definitely people have already registered if they didn't register to vote. But I want this to live onward. What do you
Yeah.
say to that 18, the 19, the 20-year-old that sat out this election and said, well, politics doesn't matter. I'm just going to focus on my career. My vote, it's just one vote. It doesn't really. What's your message to that person?
Yeah, I'll be very honest and just say that the reason that I did this tour, the reason I wrote the book, the reason I keep talking to young people is because of something that upset me. A few years ago, I kept hearing this common theme amongst our peers that they didn't have hope, that they didn't have hope in the future of life. They didn't have hope in the future of America. They just didn't have hope in general. And that's sad. That's unfortunate. I disagree with that. And so that's why I wrote the book. That's why I did both tours, because I 100% believe that and I think everybody else listening to this podcast today should put their hope in Jesus Christ alone, not in a single
Love it.
DC bureaucrat. And when we
Love it.
do that, we're not only winning the White House on Tuesday, not winning the Senate and the House, we're actually going to start a revival. And that's what's needed. That's what's needed after this podcast comes out. That's what's needed years from this point. What I told Auburn last night in my last speech until I think like February, I'm taking a few months off of speaking, was how important it is to understand that Tuesday is trivial. That yes, it's so important to get out and vote and do everything, but Tuesday is just another day in God's plan. We don't need to stress. You don't need to worry. He's got a plan. It's going to be okay. There's a lot of eternity left after Tuesday. That needs to be the focus. And I encourage your audience to listen to that message.
I love that message, because Jesus said the worries of tomorrow are for tomorrow. So don't worry about
Yes.
the clothes you wear. Don't worry about your food. Don't worry about anything. So imagine if he said not to worry about clothes or food, the last thing that we should be worrying about is, oh, what's going to happen? Like, doesn't mean that we can't be proactive, but it
Sure.
means that we should have our faith in Christ, our faith in the God of the universe, and saying, at the end of the day, his plan is his plan. Whether Kamala wins, whether Trump
Yeah.
wins, that's his plan. He's ordained it. That's it. That's what it's going to be. But like I said, I think what's most important and what you said, I'm gonna really drive this home, is that they're not mutually exclusive. So just because you're a Christian, you can't get into politics, and just because you're in
Yes,
politics doesn't mean you can
exactly.
be a Christian. So seriously, I thank you for taking the time.
Of
And
course.
any last thoughts that you want to leave for the audience?
Yeah, make sure you get out and vote if this comes out on Monday. Regardless, pray, 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 pray before the election, on election day, after the election. Thank you for doing this. This is a lot of fun. After the election, when I have more time, we'll sit down and maybe do this in person and have a longer
For
form
sure.
conversation. This was awesome, and your audience is great. So I wish them all the best of luck.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you guys again for making it.
Thank you.
If you guys, I'm going to link everything in the description. His book, I personally
Thank
am
you.
going to order it. I implore you to order it, because if you just saw this interview, which was 29 minutes, about to be 30 exact, I mean, your book is how many pages?
Like it's like 11 chapters, 56,000 words.
Okay. 11 chapters of condensed wisdom from this 18-year-old young man. I'm telling you guys, he's going to be a superstar. He already is, but I'm going to link everything in the description, the book, Instagram, his podcast, everything, guys. Check it out. And seriously, thank you again for making it to the end, and I'll see you on the next one. Awesome. Okay, so let me,
Amazing.
before you head out,
Yeah.